if I'm not going to hold back my opinion, I'll just say it is a gross exploitation of the LDS paradigm.
Well, first off, I think the thing that I want to talk about is the movie itself, Heretic. It came out, and I don't want to necessarily even talk about any of the specifics of the movie itself per se, and or even say it's a bad movie. You know what I mean? Like, if people love this movie, I'm not here to say like, oh, it's a crappy movie. I think though the issue is when you have media that misrepresents a particular religious faith, and or in this movie, I think generally faith more broadly.
Yeah.
And I guess one of the first things I wanted to get your take on is, you know, you've been around Latter-day Saints, and I always tell people that I don't think anyone is getting to know us more genuinely than you. Very, very few people actually take the time to really get to know us. You've moved to Utah, all that kind of stuff. So you know who we are. And then now you also are seeing how we are portrayed in the media. I want to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm glad you're asking it because I don't get asked this question a lot, and I actually have a pretty strong opinion about it. I was actually just talking to a fellow evangelical in Utah who is wired like me. We're cut from the same cloth, and we were having this conversation like, man, just this interfaith connections and these building bridges, it's just the nuances in that, I don't know if you remember years ago, the book, How Wide the Divide. It was evangelicals, Latter-day Saints getting together. And the whole idea was like, how wide is this divide? How close can we get to the edges? Because the reality is there is a divide. Okay.
Yeah,
There's
sure.
a difference. That's why we need the bridge. You don't need a bridge if there's not a divide. And so we were talking about like, how do we like continue to honor Latter-day Saints, but still be honest about where we don't stand and not offend, but at the same time, be willing to tell the truth. And as we were talking, this individual was saying, because I will be the first one. I see Latter-day Saints as like my siblings. Like I'm going to be really honest with them on areas of faith and doctrine that I disagree on or things that might even concern me. But if anybody steps in and starts to give them crap, I'm going to be the first one that's going to jump in the way and say, knock it off, like back off right now. Okay. And it's not that Latter-day Saints need our protecting per se, but even people within our context, within the broader, Protestant evangelical context, there are small pockets of individuals who just go hard after Latter-day Saints. So the fact that now you have this movie coming out and it is, if I'm not going to hold back my opinion, I'll just say it is a gross exploitation of the LDS paradigm. I feel very troubled by it. I'm not going to see it. And I feel, in a sense, kind of protective of my Latter-day Saint brothers and sisters where this exploitation is taking place and this type of story is being told. So that's more specific to how I feel about it regarding the Latter-day Saint piece. But I understand, I know enough about Heretic. I've read up on it to know that it's kind of a little bit of a shot at or a referendum on, the idea of religion and Christianity in general. So
yeah, and I think that that's something else for those who maybe are religious and are kind of like, oh, good, like I kind of like seeing them go after the Mormons. I'm kind of like, I hope y'all realize what they're doing with this film is they're using us as sort of you all agree that Mormons are crazy and weirdos, but guess what? You all are just copies of religion. It's all about control. And so it's this broader narrative that they're trying to put forth of religion as a tool of control. And Mormonism is just sort of this example of it, right?
yeah. And I think that's where, even for me personally, people, there's been this huge push. There's been a huge rush in media to, in my opinion, exploit Latter-day Saint culture. You saw it a few years ago with Keep Sweet and Pray, which isn't directly mainstream Mormonism, but it's an offshoot. You had the Under the Banner of Heaven with Andrew Garfield. Now you have The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives. You also have Heretic, and everybody's like, so what do you think of these shows? Like, what are your thoughts on that? I'm like, I don't have any because I'm not watching them, and I'm not going to watch them because I think what it is, and I'm going to use this word a ton. I believe that it's, yes, a shot at the idea of religion, but a specific exploitation of Latter-day Saint belief, because there are certain beliefs held within the LDS paradigm and even in the history of the LDS church that, to be quite frankly, I think are just easy shots. They're kind of pot shots, but they're also in a sense kind of antiquated. They're not totally informed. They're caricatures of what I think represents most Latter-day Saint belief and thought and practice at this point. So that's one of the reasons why I've said I'm not going to do that. I'd rather have a conversation with my friend Jacob than try to learn about the LDS church from under the banner of heaven, or, I'd rather talk to my buddy David Snell and his wife about what it was like serving on a mission, as opposed to, what these sister missionaries experience in this movie, right? I see very little redeeming value in it.
Well, and also it's funny because they're just blatant misrepresentations in the film. For example, the film implies that Latter-day Saints can't use birth control. Not true. It's left up to the couples. Even before you're married, like there's various reasons why people would use birth control. They have this part where it's like, you guys can't drink Coca-Cola because it's like against the word of wisdom. It's like, dude, we're like known for drinking Diet Coke like way more than we should. Okay. There's the old magic underwear trope, which is, again, for somebody like you that's been around us, that knows what the garment means, even if it's like not your thing. I mean, and the Catholics, I know, is actually, I was really pleased to hear, I think it was Trent Horn and some of the other guys on Pints with Aquinas, they were talking about, be careful about going after like Mormon, holy underwear when we wear, I think it's called a scapula, which is like, there's various religious clothing that people have worn throughout all of history for various reasons. They kind of portray it like it's a shock when Joseph Smith's polygamy is brought up to missionaries. Like we haven't heard that 10,000 times. Right.
Like this isn't like actually part of the like broader conversation right now in general.
Yeah.
It is.
And it's just this, the thing that worried me though, there were a couple other misrepresentations that were a little more worrisome. One of them is that missions aren't safe. And there's a lot of people who are like, oh my gosh, like, what could happen, without realizing, first of all, the women in the movie broke the mission rules. Women are not allowed to meet alone with a man. And
right.
If a man says, oh, my wife's in the back room, it's like, that's a shady situation, right? It's a very strict thing. In fact, and guys aren't allowed to meet with women all by themselves, just to avoid issues. And then there's just the old trope that we're these really naive people that don't know anything about anything. And the reality is I know atheists that are super naive. I know Christians that are super naive of all stripes. Latter-day Saints, we can be naive too. So again, it's this attacking of the straw man version of religion, the straw man version of Latter-day Saints, instead of engaging like with what's really there. And what's really there is actually and I find this even as I engage with other Christians, there's a lot more there, and it's actually a lot more interesting when you get beyond all the tropes and try and actually understand one another, fully realizing that as you understand each other, you're going to find that like there are differences. I'm not saying like, oh, once we all, understand each other, then we'll all be kumbaya. Right. But I don't know, it really bugs me when people engage with fake versions, caricatures of any religious belief.
Well, I mean, and what's taking place there, ironically, is it's a violation of how the missionaries are actually trained at the MTC to lead into those conversations with questions and with respect, and to, move towards serving others and being a friend, not out of naivety, but out of a genuine desire to, connect with the people. Like I have talked to people who've been, I was just at the MTC a few months ago, and they made it very clear that one of the best ways to be an effective missionary is to not just go and do the sales pitch, but to actually get to know the person, to learn about them, to, yes, let them know who you are and be, full disclosure for who you are, but don't just assume that the house that you're knocking on or the person that opens the door believes a certain way or, lives a certain way. Like, get to know the person first. And that's actually what this movie doesn't do. It's not getting to know the Latter-day Saints. It's not understanding true missionary culture. Now, I know I'm probably sounding naive because it's like, bro, this is a psychological horror thriller. Like, they're not sending people to talk to the Quorum of the 12 to get an accurate representation. Like, but that's kind of the point. That's the problem but you're still putting stuff out there that perpetuates a misrepresentation of these caricatures that can, in a lot of ways, I think, do a lot of harm. So.
Well, and they ally themselves with, because they'll want to act like, well, we got two girls that were former members of the church, right? Kind of the whistleblower mentality. Like, we'll get someone who used to be a part of this religion, and then we'll get the real story. And it's always kind of funny because the anti-Mormon crowd will kind of be like, oh yeah, this is great. See, this is what it's really like when you're in there, and we've left, so now we know. And it's sort of if you have a disgruntled employee, is that going to be like the best person to go to learn what it's really like to work for a particular company?
Right.
So you have kind of this union of both the sort of anti-religious crowd that then molds with those who have left the faith to come together and try and produce something that has an appearance and a plausibility, but that in the details, again, it just misrepresents.
Yeah. And I think what's really going on is Latter-day Saints are kind of being used, in a sense, to make a broader statement on this. What I believe it comes down to is this power shift that's been taking place culturally over the past number of decades, where America's a Christian nation, and you get through, the 50s and the 60s, and you have like the revolution, all that other stuff. But then you have this sort of this holiness pendulum swing back to, Christianity. They kind of hunker down. This is what it was like in the evangelical world. Like, we don't watch rated R movies. We don't listen to secular music. And so you have all of these power dynamics that are going back and forth. Ronald Reagan was this great Christian president, and then Bill Clinton came along, right? So, but I think what we know, even what's going on in the political world, what's taking place with a lot of social agendas that are coming to the forefront right now when it comes to certain hot button issues. To me, this is an attempt to take back power from this religious, voice that has been so influential, and let's be honest, probably has done some damage when in extreme forms.
Yeah.
Extreme religious bigotry or extreme even religious pressure within family units or community units. I don't think a movie that points people to a story told about then how like ends up with like violence and all this other stuff. I don't see how that moves the ball forward, right?
Yeah, and it's funny. You brought up something that I hadn't thought about, and that just right now, real time, is kind of blowing my mind. So one of the things that goes on, so you're familiar with who John DeLynn is, right?
Yeah.
So John DeLynn, and even bigger than him now is Alyssa Grenfell.
Yeah, I've noticed.
who's a big time anti-Mormon YouTuber. And what's funny is John did a survey on his channel. He just dropped a thing and said, like, what's your relationship to the church amongst the viewers? And I think it was like 67% were never Mo's, meaning they'd never been a member of this church.
Interesting.
And I was like, what are people that have never been associated with the church doing watching his channel? They're the vast majority of his viewers. And with Grenfell, it's even more. And so what I realized, and I've talked about this before, is there's sort of this emerging genre of what we call, some of us have coined the term, cult pornography. It's basically, hey, let's go watch. It's kind of like almost like a spinoff of like true crime, right? It's like, do you want to know about your Mormon neighbors, how weird they really are? Like what they're not telling you? Well, we have these like ex-members, and they're like spilling the beans on how crazy this all is, right?
Right.
But what you just said that is blowing my mind, because I've always wondered, why do people watch this? Like, why would you be interested?
It's cathartic.
it validates their socio-political paradigm that religious people are weirdos and bad, and that, you know, the Donald Trump movement and all of these people, and you can have, anyone can have whatever opinion they want on Donald Trump.
Sure.
But sort of the right wing, they're part of this weirdo religious mindset. And so anytime you can sort of lump them all in together as a bunch of weirdo psychopaths, it feels good to them.
Yeah, it does. And to me, again, that's the grossest part about this movie, is that the hero in this movie, and I've not seen it, but I'm assuming the hero, he's an anti-hero, is this psychopath that's taking advantage of these young ladies. Like, that's how far people are willing to go to get that cathartic release out of their system, to stick it to the religious man, if you will, which is pretty twisted.
Well, and it's an interesting thing, because there is a side to the movie that portrays religion as something good, but only in the sense that it's a good story to tell yourself, to make yourself feel better, right? There's a growing amount of this where I think people are confronted with the facts about the way that Christianity has basically revolutionized the world and led to all the like positive things like human rights that we all kind of take for granted. And I think that people then go, well, and I think the movie kind of portrays this. It's this idea that religion is a useful fiction, right? It can be useful for some people to help them to cope with the challenges of life and mortality. And that's sort of a thing. I think there's a part in the movie where he's told, like, no one will listen to your prayers, but you know, you can do it anyway, and it'll make you feel better, right? What is your thought on this idea of this common trope that religion it's a useful fiction? We can't believe it, but hey, you know, if it helps you, it helps you, and that's a good thing, I guess.
I mean, I'm going to be speaking from a Protestant evangelical paradigm, but my answer to that is, we live in a fallen and broken world, and we need saving. We need a savior, and that's who Christ is, right? And in order to receive Christ, there's a necessity to repent, to recognize my own brokenness, my own fallenness, and to put my faith in the one who loves me and saved me. And that requires accountability. That requires, in a certain sense, submission, and to set aside this Americanized idea of this very individualistically driven existence, where I can do whatever I want. Don't tell me what to do, type of thing. And I think that this way to say, well, you know, religion is a useful fiction, is a bit of a cop-out, because that's not really the message of Christianity. That's not really the message of the gospel. That's not the message of the Bible that I read. It's not, oh yeah, this is the way that you can be good boys and girls and do good things. No, it's this world's evil and broken and messed up, and without Christ, I have no hope. And that call to repentance, that call to put faith in him, and to not just serve Christ as our savior, but to serve him as our Lord, requires this volitional shift that I think a lot of people are resistant to. So I think they're stopping short of the gospel call to just simply say, oh, well, it's a great function of society. But that's actually not even compatible with what the Bible teaches. So to me, it just doesn't fit.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I think that is not just a Protestant perspective. I think that's a Latter-day Saint perspective for sure. And our differences on that are probably fairly minor in comparison to what they're kind of putting out. I always say one thing too. Christianity itself is not hey, this is a useful sort of life philosophy, right? It makes some really specific claims that are either true or false, with the number one among those being that Jesus Christ walked out of that tomb.
Yes.
And I always tell people, and that's the other thing, like the proclamation of the gospel wasn't like, hey guys, we have this new plan that'll make you really happy. The proclamation was, he lives, he rose.
Yeah.
He's alive.
Yeah. That sealed the deal.
The great proclamation of Christians is that he lives, because, and I always tell people this, here's what happens. I always kind of say, imagine if you could take a video camera and you had it on that tomb, and I showed it to like your most secular atheist ever, and it shows him walking out. It's like everything changes.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, all the crap you thought about the world like goes out the window.
Yeah.
And now you got to deal with that.
Well,
and I always said, Christians are just people that are trying to figure out how the frick to deal with that reality.
Yeah, for sure. I 100% agree with that. I mean, that was Paul's whole thing. He's like, I mean, that was 1 Corinthians chapter 15. He's like, y'all, like, this all comes down to resurrection. Like, he rose from the dead, he defeated death. That's the ultimate victory. And I mean, that was honestly, I mean, this is a game changer for his brother, for James. James was like, he opposed Christ until he saw him after he died, and he's like, oh dang, I was wrong. Like, and then he became like the leader of the church in Jerusalem, right? So yeah, I totally agree with that. And I mean, we could get all day long into all the claims about, the cult of Osiris and all these other, this is just a retread of other religions. That's a whole other conversation that in my opinion is easily defensible. But I think at the end of the day, Christianity's unique message is so much more than, well, this is a nice little, cultural decoration that keeps the room looking nice. It's so much more than that. And the testimony that I bear goes far beyond it. Makes my life more functional. My life's been transformed.
And I think I think it's funny that they're willing to admit that it works. See, that's like, I think it's really stupid for someone to look at Christianity generally and not conclude that this has been an absolutely in fact, I often say the number one reason I'm a Christian. So if I'm going to back up for a second. I'm looking at this idea of God. And I believe there's a higher power. I believe myself. Let's say I get to that point, right? I'm searching for the higher power. Well, where is this higher power? Has he ever interacted with the world in any way? Does this higher power make any moral demands on me? Because if he doesn't, if there's no moral demands, if there's no interaction with the world, then that's no different from atheism, right?
Yeah, for sure.
It's the functional equivalent of atheism. So what Christianity actually provides is this wild story that says, if you're looking for God, if you're looking for that higher power, here he was here. That's the great proclamation. And I think that the fact that it's so useful, it isn't just useful, it's revolutionary. If there's ever a movement in the history of the world that did, like, let's just say, I used this actually before as an analogy. Let's say there's a book and everyone who read it, their life just transformed for the better. They overcame all their addictions. They just like everything about them changed because of this book on like a spiritual level. They were a new person because of it. Every single person you knew that read this book, and you decide to crack it open, and the book talks about this miraculous story. I think that's grounds to say maybe there's something to this miraculous story.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you just described the Bible, but yeah, for sure. I mean, and that's where you just get into the complexities of what Christianity claims in Christ. John chapter 1, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Like, God didn't just stay off in the cosmos, kind of whispering revelation to us, but he, becoming flesh and living among us and bringing light and life into the world. I mean, I say this all the time. I mean, it was a humanity altering moment. I mean, every day we talk about it when we say the date, right? Today is the 11th day of the 11th month in the 2024th year that we think the Messiah of the world came. Like, dang, God showed up.
Absolutely. I actually I want to play a clip because this isn't from the movie. Unfortunately, we can't play any clips from the movie because get copyright issues there. Mm-hmm. But one of the themes in the movie is this idea that Christianity and religion, it's about control, and that it's not good for everyone, right? Maybe it's good for you, but it's not good for everyone. And it was funny because recently John DeLynn was talking about that. And so I have this clip I want to share of John talking about sort of where he kind of went because of this idea. So let me pull this up real fast.
There is no way my conception of Jesus, the Savior, goodness, even what Mormonism taught me, there's no way that we just can all stay silent as like entire generations die or feel pushed out of the church and cut off from their families or forced to live lives that are totally unhealthy for them to live. So, but I love the church. See, that was always the rub. I loved elders quorum. I loved sacrament meeting. I loved testimony meeting. I loved serving. So, but then I realized I learned enough about privilege to realize that, like, well, part of the reason I love Mormonism so much is because it was made by and for people like me, straight white males. And so I decided, well, how can I stay and enjoy this when I know that there's so many people suffering?
So what are your thoughts on that? Because that's not just a criticism that's leveled towards Latter-day Saints. It's a criticism leveled towards Christianity generally, right? Oh, can you hear me? I'm having trouble hearing you. I think your mic might be muted.
Sorry about that. I can relate quite a bit to where evangelical Christianity or cultural Christianity has been toxic and hurtful and abusive in its misuse. But when it comes to the fundamental, I can't relate to the statement that he just made where he said, and maybe he's speaking specifically about the Latter-day Saint pairing, but it's for straight white men. I can't relate to that. I mean, as far as the Christianity I know, it was actually for a bunch of like Middle Eastern fishermen and tax collectors and zealots. It was for a bunch of like, slaves and slave owners. Like it was this paradigm exploding, like socio class, like transcending injection of meaning and purpose and awareness and life and love and forgiveness that goes so far beyond my individualized identity as a straight white male in America. So I just simply can't relate to that. And nor do my brothers in Egypt or my brothers in, Zimbabwe. Like I know plenty of Christian brothers and sisters who have a completely different social and cultural background than me that are experiencing the same life-altering, transforming power of Jesus. So whatever and I get what he's saying, like he experienced community, he experienced culture, and as a result, it was infused in his identity. I get all that. But to then say that that was the reason that the Christianity exists or Mormonism exists, I can't relate to that. I can't corroborate that, and I can't relate to that.
Yeah, and I was going to say, it's actually really funny. He's so historically ignorant as to what Christianity did for the white cis male in the Roman Empire, because it was the male of the Roman Empire that had total dominion over everything. And it was the Christians who all of a sudden were elevating the status of women and slaves and all sorts of other people. And so to act as though Christianity is just this power game for white privileged men is just to be completely historically ignorant of the status of men in the time of Rome and Paul. And what Christianity was saying was radical.
Well, in the time of Jesus, going back to the resurrection, we do realize that to the point, historically, a lot of current and ancient cultures are patriarchal to the extent that in the first century, while Jesus was living, women were not considered credible witnesses. Okay? That's true. And yet, in the gospel accounts of Jesus' resurrection, who are the first witnesses to testify that Jesus had risen from the dead? The deal maker when it comes to him claiming that he was who he claimed to be. It was women. Women were the ones that went to the tomb. Women were the first witnesses. So even there is blasting apart the cultural or ethical expectations tied to the witness of the most profound thing that ever happened, even his resurrection. So yeah, I think Christ is not, God doesn't color within the lines of our coloring book. He paints a completely different picture. How we superimpose our experiences on that, I think, is something we all kind of need to work through together.
Yeah. And I do think on that same topic, not only is Christianity revolutionary in the way that it sort of, in the context that it came from, turned upside down the social order in many ways, granting equal dignity to all human beings in a way that was really unparalleled in human history. But also, it didn't go so, it isn't radical sort of, there's another extreme that's gone over. People have said that our extremes in our culture today, a lot of people don't realize, they're actually extremes of Christian ideas. Extreme notions of equality to where men and women, not only are you equal in dignity, worth, and value, but that you are essentially not different.
Right. Yeah.
And therefore, and you have no different roles in God's plan, right? We're just interchangeable widgets, and we don't have differences in our nature, right? And so what is ironic, I think, is that John's critiques are critiques that are built on Christian principles of equality that are then taken to maybe extreme places.
Right, which is all the more reason, even going back to the way that Christianity or religion is depicted in media or movies, it's all the more important that there's a willingness to say, that's not it, that's not accurate. I mean, it's, and I know this is kind of taking a little bit of left turn even off of what you said, because, point well made, but I think that's another thing that I struggle with when it comes to whatever. I don't know if there's a message behind this movie. And again, I haven't seen it, and I'll probably, we'll get stuff in the comments like, I thought you fight criticism with curiosity. Why don't you go ask questions and watch it? Well, because there's a part of me that, like, at some point you're leading the witness whenever your portrayal of religion or Christianity or, sister missionaries is to tell this very twisted story that ends in like such a violent, place. I just don't like even putting that out in the world. And I think that's my problem with the dialogue. Like, right, we're just coming out of an election season, or, now we have all these movies and all these things coming out. The dialogue is meant to exploit, and it's also putting ideas in the world that I don't think, even if they feel like there are extreme ideas out there about, equality or religious bigotry and all this other stuff, I don't see how this moves the conversation forward. I don't even like the fact that, Jacob, I didn't even know what a sister missionary was 5 years ago. Didn't even know they existed. And that's probably representative of a lot of these people that are going to go see the movie. Like, the idea that you're saying, oh, really? There's there's young women that walk around, and like, just putting that out there, and then putting, like, in this world, such a dark narrative surrounding this, I think is dangerous. And I'm almost at a loss for words, because I feel so, like, protective and frustrated that this type of stuff is out there. Now, thankfully, our boy Dallas Jenkins released a movie on the same weekend and gave Heretic a run for its money, because Dallas put out his Christmas movie, and it's an amazing testimony of Christ. And I think it made like $11 million at the box office this weekend. So go see that one.
Awesome. Well, I haven't seen that one. I'm gonna need to. I'm a huge
It's so
Dallas
good.
Jenkins fan. And one last thing about this movie, as we kind of wind this down, is about the there's sort of this idea of religion is bad. But I think one of the things, at least from my perspective, is, I guess I'll ask this, is anyone, I guess, how do I ask this? Do you think it's possible for human beings not to worship something? In a sense, don't we all have our religion?
Again, coming from my paradigm, we were made to worship, period. That's why we exist. God created Adam and Eve. He placed them in the garden as we are the representatives of God in the earthly realm. Okay? The way the scriptures describe the realm of God is heaven. The realm that he placed us in this creative realm is earth. And when he placed Adam and Eve in the garden, he said, you have dominion. You are my representatives here on earth, right? So as a result of that, I mean, we are always, we're always going to be drawn to emanating the glory of what we feel is great, because we exist to emanate the glory of the greatest one, God. Like, we are his glory emanating in this world. So where in a broken world, when there's this fractured relationship because of sin, and there's a need for reconciliation to God, we will find other things, because that's what we do. Okay. Fish swim, birds fly, humans reflect the glory of greatness. And the ultimate greatness is the great I am, Yahweh God himself. So where we get divorced from God, then whatever other greatness we can find, we will try to emanate the glory of that. And I think that's committing one's existence to what we believe is great and telling other people about what we think is great. That's worship. Okay. Worship is not just singing songs. It's where we are proclaiming the greatness and committing our lives to the greatness of something. So that's where it gets messed up. When it's divorced from God, when it's divorced from our Creator and the one who loves us, things get pretty skewed and screwy, which is why we need a Savior, which is why we need to be reconciled to God. And it's why once we are reconciled to God, the ultimate call is to live lives, Romans chapter 12, verses 1-2, of worship and of glory of God and his great love.
Yeah, and I love that. I've often said, to put it in more maybe secular terms, Jordan Peterson talks about sort of your hierarchy of values, right? There's always going to be something at the top of that. And that, functionally speaking, is what you worship. That's the thing that orients your value structure entirely. And you don't have an option with that. See, one of the things is this movie tends to posit that there's a false dichotomy that's created, and that is religion bad, and then there's this other option of like no religion. But the reality is that let's get rid of the word religion if you don't like that. Your worldview, whatever it is, whatever you worship, whatever you have at the top of your hierarchy of values, like we all have that. The only question is, and this is the language that I like to use, it isn't if you have faith. The only question is what have you placed your faith in?
100%.
Right?
100%. And we all put our faith in something. You know, some people worship their jobs. Some people worship their families. Some people worship their hobbies or whatever. And they're not even always bad things, right? Mm-hmm. But when you commit your existence to something other than God or over God, anytime you replace God, there's a term for that in the scriptures. It's called idolatry. Yep. It's called idol worship, right? So that's why God remaining on the throne of our hearts is, it's not about control. It's about us finding our seat back in the place where we belong. And that is worshiping him and emanating his glory and his love.
Absolutely. And I think that the question, or the movie doesn't get that right, is that it assumes that there's somewhere else to go that's better. And I've always said, look, I have to place my faith somewhere. And to those who are non-Christians out there, or anyone who's listening, I just want to frame the entire discussion as, look, if you got something better, bring it to the table. But like, I have placed my faith here. And that's what Christians are doing. We are people that are seeking where to place our life. And what we have discovered is Jesus of Nazareth. We have discovered this transformative book and power that brings real spiritual transformation to us. And so because we've experienced this directly, we then go out and tell others, hey, I've placed my faith here and it's transformed my life. And we're inviting you're placing your faith somewhere. Why don't you come and see if this is where you want to place it? Because our testimony is that this is where it's to be placed. And the movie just doesn't get that. It's just this religion bad. Other people have said it, and I think they hit it about right. The movie is a bunch of Reddit tier atheism. It's like there are serious sort of atheist conversations to have and interesting engagements there. I just felt like this movie wasn't that.
Yeah. And I know, like, we're going to get people that lighten up, guys. It's just a movie. It's like, okay, but we are talking about something that is deeply meaningful to a lot of people. And to your point, like this transformative experience that was brought to the earth by Christ. I mean, the fact that so many of his disciples were willing to die, they gave their lives for this. And the one unique thing about Christianity is we don't believe that that necessarily elevates your place in heaven necessarily. So we don't. It's like, it's not like the more people I get to come to Christ, you know, the bigger my mansion's going to be. We don't teach that. This is something that is so intrinsically interwoven into the cry of the heart of every human. We have to tell you about it, and we have to share this with you. So that's what I think is dangerous about this movie, is to somehow take these two young ladies that are carrying out what they feel they need to carry out, and for it to be twisted into what it is. I don't know, man. It's just not for me.
Well, I agree. And thank you so much for coming on. Any final thoughts besides what you said so far?
I mean, can I just ask you one quick question before we wrap up?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because, I mean, you've been asking me a lot of questions. Can you tell me, like, what is the broader response from a Latter-day Saint standpoint? I mean, is it frustration, fear, anger? What are you sensing in the Latter-day Saint?
Actually, well, the vast majority are just kind of a big eye roll. And like, really, another one of these, we're kind of almost used to it by this point. The media portrayals of us are just awful. That's honestly, Jeff, that's why I love your channel so much. That's why because I'm like, oh, hey, someone who's actually and not agreeing with us, like recognizing where the differences are. But I hate misrepresentation. I do not like to do it myself. I think it's a coward's way of doing it. Like, if you have a real disagreement, then let's engage with the real disagreements and not caricature and lampoon each other in ways that just are not accurate to what the actual beliefs of others are. Yeah. And that's, I think most people have had that reaction. The anti and ex-Mormon community love it because it's just like another one to put into their belt. And then strangely, I think there may even be some within the church who see this as maybe they're more on the progressive side, that are like, yeah, maybe this is kind of a good critique. So we recognize patriarchy in our religion and stuff like that. And so there's been a little bit of that too. And then there's just people that just enjoyed the movie because they enjoy the genre, and fair enough. If you love the movie and think it's a great movie, fine. Like, I'm not commenting on the quality of the movie from a cinematic perspective. I'm just commenting on the religious angle that's to it. So yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that with me. Well, just know that I when it comes to this movie and that portrayal and the misrepresentation, I'm in your corner, and I'm not afraid to say it. So, well, awesome. Well, hey, when people are misrepresenting you guys, you can have me on your show. I'm happy to go to bat when people misrepresent you guys too. All right, we'll make it happen. All righty, thanks. Thanks, Jacob. Hey guys, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that subscribe button so my future videos show up on your feed. Also, if you or someone that you know has benefited from the content here on Thoughtful Faith, please consider becoming a channel donor or volunteer by visiting my new website, thoughtfulfaith.org, and clicking on the Get Involved page.